Hi, my name is Maxim Rudnev and I'm going to present our common study with Melanie Vukler, which is called Revisiting Cowgill's Modernization Theory, Perceived Social Status of Older Adults Across Many Countries. Our study is based on modernization theory developed by Donald Cowgill. This is a very specific understanding of the modernization. It is limited to the aspects that are only relevant to the status of older people. There are many aspects, and we focus on the four of them. First of all, it's a development of health technology, which came with modernization. It led to life prolongation, and it leads to a growing number of older adults, which is also known as an aging of society. Second, there is education. The modern education brought to younger people, benefited them, and the wisdom and knowledge traditionally possessed by older people was wiped out by the books, by the mass education, by internet now. So their skills and knowledge is sort of obsolete in the modernized countries. Third, there's economic development, which requires, the modern economy requires mobility, adaptability, new skills, some things that are harder for the older people to obtain and to follow. And finally, urbanization breaks up an extended family and cuts children's support, and basically the older people stay disconnected from their children, often staying at the rural area, whereas their children move to the city. All these four aspects of modernization lead to similar results, to the decrease in the social status of older people. Older adults become less competitive due to these processes and eventually lose their fight for the labor market, and the position on the labor market is what defines the social status. They move to less prestigious jobs, they sometimes lose jobs, and the pension systems increase this process, and so their relative position in society decreases. And I have to say several words about what the social status is, because it seems self-evident, yet it is a very elusive concept, and very few researchers actually give some specific definition to this concept. It is not a social class, because it's not defined solely by income, education, occupation, or some sort of activity. It is more similar to prestige. It is some relative position of a person in or a social group in a society, which this position is recognized somehow. Cowgill's modernization theory is 50 years old, and it was one of the first theories to explain some macro processes in relation to status of older people. And it was criticized through these 5 decades, but it was very rarely tested. It was criticized for unclear definitions of social status and modernization. It was criticized for assuming the golden age of older people in some former times. It was criticized for ignoring cultural differences, which we will address in this study as well. And one exception that directly tested the theory is the study of Vukler with co-authors, and they generally found, using the data from 25 wealthy European countries, that Cowgill was wrong, because they found a positive link between modernization and social status of older people. So we are left with many questions in regard to the status of older people. First of all, we still don't know if the Cowgill's theory actually is correct. Does it work in the larger set of countries, not just among the wealthy ones? What if we compare the less modernized countries with the most modernized in the world? Second one, is there a curvilinear association? It comes from the criticism that there could be curvilinear relations, which comes from the idea that in postmodern societies, the status of older people raises again due to the social provisions, due to the development of pension system, and so on. Third, which aspect of modernization is more important? Is it the education that changed their status, or maybe it is their number, their share in society, or maybe something else? And finally, does culture have an impact, or all the differences in social status are due to universal modernization pathways? To test the theory, we used data from the World Value Survey collected between 2010 and 2014. It included almost 79,000 respondents from 58 countries with representative national samples. The key measures used in this study are two questions. This is similar, and they ask, how do you think most people in this country view the position in society of people over 70 and in their 40s? We used the two questions because the concept of social status is hierarchical, so we use the difference between the meta-perception of people in their 40s and perception of the status of people over 70 years old. The measurement of modernization was tightly linked to the four aspects we chose as the key aspects of modernization. First, it was economic development, measured by GDP per capita, the level of urbanization as a simple percentage of urban population in country, average schooling was measured with a so-called school life expectancy in tertiary education, basically it's higher education. And finally, health technology was measured by its consequence by simply the percentage of population aged 65 and plus. The summative index had a high Cronbach's alpha and McDonald's omega as well. Let's have the first look at the data by comparing means. Here you can see the ranking based on the social status of older people, and at the top you can see the green circles which represent predominantly Muslim countries, and at the bottom the red circles that represent post-communist countries. And now we can combine these country means with modernization index, and we can see very clear association. It is negative and consistent. You can see that the countries that are more modernized have lower social status of people over 70. Focusing on Muslim countries only, you can see no connection, no association between modernization index and status of older people, and there is no correlation between these two in non-Muslim countries. In contrast, focusing on post-communist countries shows a stunning correlation of minus 0.91, very strong correlation between modernization and status of older people in post-communist countries. And now let's test it properly with multi-level regressions, which look like this. Model 1 shows the effect of modernization index. It is negative and significant, something we have already seen on the maps. And then we've split this modernization index into its components to evaluate each component separately. And we can see that the effect of GDP per capita is small and barely significant. The effect of urbanization rate is insignificant, and the largest effect comes from the percent of population over 65 and from tertiary schooling. We also included the squares of these predictors into the model to test the curvilinear relations between modernization and status of older people. And we can see that it was not significant for general modernization index and only barely significant for two of its components, but quite significant for population over 65. And the population over 65 explains 60% of the variance of the social status of older people, variance across countries. So let's test if this is really more important component of modernization than the others. For that, we included simultaneously different components together with a population over 65. As you can see, the population over 65 was significant in every model, but none of the other indicators were significant. It implies that the population over 65 is the indicator that is responsible for this correlation between modernization and status of people over 70. And you can see that the association between these two variables is really strong. And there are two very simple conclusions. First of all, Cowgill was right in general. There is a negative association between modernization and the status of older people. Second, there is not any aspect of modernization matters. It's just share of older people, share of people in the society. The more people, the lower is their status. These results reminded us about the economics theory of diminishing marginal utility. Of course, we don't want to dehumanize older people, and we do not consider the utility of older adults. But this theory seems to explain our results very nicely. It seems that there is a supply of older people, which is the number of them in each society, and there is demand for older people. Of course, every society needs some older adults to properly function, and it seems that low number supply raises their status, price, right in economic terms, and the high numbers seem to lower their status. The demand seems to decrease due to so-called market saturation. Well, there are too many older people in the society, too many in the sense that they feed all the demand for them. And there is some extra supply of older people which diminishes their utility, which is a social status. Indirectly, it was confirmed in one study across the Chinese cities, and it seems that the growing number of older adults diminished the feeling of filial piety among the residents of the cities. Of course, there is future research badly needed to detail these suggestions. And the most interesting part is the effect of culture on social status of older people. In this multi-level model, we introduced the cultural zones as defined by Engelhardt. And we can see that in Muslim countries, the level of social status of older people was consistently higher, and in post-communist countries, it was consistently lower. And given that modernization index was also significant, in all these regressions, there were also the interaction effects between Muslim and post-communist cultural zones and modernization index. What does it mean? Well, these interactions basically show what we already seen on the descriptive maps. We can see that an overall effect is moderate and negative. The effect of modernization on social status in post-communist countries is stronger and negative, and in Muslim countries it is also negative, but much lower. These results demonstrate that in addition to what the Cowgill's theory predicted, there was some impact from cultural zones. But it came not from the usual suspects such as Southeast Asia. It came from Muslim countries and from post-communist countries. In Muslim countries, the level of social status of older people was consistently higher, and in post-communist countries, the level of status of older people was consistently lower. Why is that? Well, the short answer is we don't know yet. But we have some speculations, and here are speculations about the Muslim countries. We suggest that the theory does not quite really work in Muslim countries, and that filial piety, which is widely associated with South Asian cultures, works in Muslim countries too. And it seems that it works in Muslim countries despite the modernization. Whereas in South Asian cultures, the modernization basically modified the filial piety. And it seems that the higher religiosity level of Muslim countries reinforces this filial piety. But it also requires further research. We don't know for sure. An extremely low level of social status of older people in post-communist countries couldn't be explained by cultural things only, but it has to do with the history of the post-communist countries. As it follows, all these countries were communist at some moment, and then the regime broke up. The interesting point is that the moment at which the countries transitioned from post-communist to democratic countries was when the people in their 70s, who were the subject of assessment of our survey, they were in their 50s at the moment of the collapse of communist regimes. And it seems that they couldn't adapt to the new reality. The most part of their human capital, their skills, their education, their social soft skills, all kinds of skills, were obsolete, and their capital, including the financial capital, was collapsed as well. So they didn't make it in the new reality, and as a result, they lost the fight for the labor market, and they were forced to take the lower positions, and in the end they got the extremely low social status. That's it. Thank you very much for making it to this place. I'm welcoming your commentaries through email or through the discussion that follows up. And finally, I have to acknowledge that my part of the job was supported by this Human Capital Multidisciplinary Research Center. Thank you.